Hey friends, welcome or welcome back to the Destiny Awaits podcast. This is a table where we get together to have a conversation about how to uncover identity, discover our purpose, and step into our destiny. So if that's your jam, come and join this conversation. I'm your host, Andrea John, and we are continuing our series that we call Jesus Speaks as we dive deep into the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus left us so many lessons in this sermon, and we have been exploring it in depth. This week, we're talking about fasting. Last week, we finished up the Lord's Prayer, and we talked about trials and tribulations and how to go through it and what that looks like and God's role in it. What is the purpose of the pain that you're going through? If you haven't heard that episode, I'm going to encourage you to click that pause button and go listen to that first, because I'm telling you, it may change your life, because it changed mine and it resonated with so many people. When you're done listening there, then come join us back here and we'll just keep on talking. We're going to talk about fasting. I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about it because we kind of talked about the context that this passage is speaking about before the Lord's Prayer. If you remember, maybe you're new here, but before the Lord's Prayer, we talked about how we shouldn't pray to get attention. We shouldn't go and make pompous circumstance when we're praying. We really should go in our closet, meaning we need to pray for God. Our intention needs to be about God, getting to know God, being with Him, not about gaining attention. Because when we pray and do things for attention, we'll get the applause from people, but God isn't impressed much, right? Like Shania Twain said. But fasting, the context that it's speaking of here is similar. The context of the fasting is around, don't do it so that people can see you. So I wasn't sure if talking about fasting was going to be repetitive because of the context in which it's being spoken of. But I thought about it, I prayed on it, and I have a personal testimony about fasting that I think may bless people and something that I learned about fasting. So I thought, let's just have a conversation about fasting. What it is, what it's not, what it's for, how to approach it, and maybe talk about some practical things as well, especially for those of you who may not fast ever or you're new to all of this. Before we start, let's go into the Message Bible translation as usual, because this is where it all started. So Matthew 6:16, it says, when you practice some appetite-denying discipline to better concentrate on God, don't make a production out of it. It might turn you into a small-time celebrity, but it won't make you a saint. If you go into training inwardly, act normal outwardly. Shampoo and comb your hair, brush your teeth, wash your face. God doesn't require attention-seeking devices. He won't overlook what you're doing. He'll reward you well. I think that translation is decent. I think it gives us a very contemporary and modern view of what this passage is trying to say. But I'd like to share with you a more conventional translation because I think it gives a better picture of the intention that the author is trying to make, which is Matthew, and Jesus was trying to say, because Jesus is the one who is speaking. Now, this is the part where Mike usually joins us, and he reads the conventional version, usually out of the NET, but you'll see that it's just me and you this week. We're going through a phase of life around here that's just interesting. There's a lot going on. And financially, there's, we need to make more because we have more expenses happening. So Mike has been working his tail off and working really hard to support our family. And he thankfully affords me the opportunity to do things like this. So we don't have the time to record because between my work schedule and his work schedule, it can be a little bit difficult. So I don't know when's the next chance we're going to have. So instead of just telling you that he'll be here next week, I don't know. So we will see. What I'd like to do, what I'm thinking of doing, is having one of you guys on here to literally have this conversation with me because I love having you here. But the reality is, you're listening to me while you're walking, you're washing the dishes, you're, taking care of your kids, doing whatever. Maybe you're on your couch watching on the TV with a notebook. I can't hear you. So I would love to, because I love having conversation and hearing people's perspectives and thought processes and just talking through things. You know what I mean? And sometimes when I do these solo, I feel like I'm talking to myself. And I just feel like we're better together. So if you're willing, feel free to invite yourself onto the podcast. And in a future episode, we can do it together. And you don't have to be in person. So if you're not local, it's okay. We can do it online. And I think it could be a lot of fun. So if you're really enjoying the Sermon on the Mount, whether I know you personally or not, like if I don't know you personally, we can have a conversation, get to know each other before, and then set it up. But I would love to have you on because I would love to hear your perspective. I have no doubt that you have some gold nuggets of wisdom to share with all of us. All right, so let's keep going. I'm going to read what I just read in the Message, but in the NIV translation. I think it's a lot fuller in the conventional translation. It says, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their face to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you." So again, the whole concept, the whole context of what's being shared here is don't fast to get attention. Don't fast. Like, I like what the Message translation says, because it says, it might turn you into a small time celebrity. I know people who their whole ministry is based on when they fast and what they fast, and their whole thing is fasting. And that's fine. And if God called you to do that, by all means, no judgment. But as long as your motive is correct, as long as your intentions are to get closer to God and not just to garner fame and attention and all of that, right? It's not for the likes and the clicks. It's truly to align your heart with God. So we'll talk about that in a second. Now, within the context of this verse, because we already talked about doing things with proper intention, authentic intention to get closer to God and all that, we won't necessarily be that specific about that point. We will talk more about fasting, right? Like I mentioned, what it is, what it's not, etc. But I want us to take note of this verse and how it starts, because it's going to tie into a personal story that I have about fasting. And when I was debating whether or not we were going to talk about fasting, as I was preparing and praying and meditating, I noticed something that caused me to say, yes, we're not going to skip over this. We're going to do it. And you're going to see exactly what I mean. Okay, so Matthew 6:16 starts off by saying, "When you fast, do not look somber, ... right? Notice what Jesus says here, because Jesus's words are important. The words that he uses is important. Like, nothing is insignificant. And this is why studying the scriptures and understanding proper context, diving in, is important, because translations are wonderful. I think having an abundance of translations is great, because every one of them has a unique interpretation. Yes, in my opinion, every translation is an interpretation. It may be similar to one another, but there's some nuances, and it's an interpretation. So words are important. Words are very big to me. And here you see when you fast. It doesn't say if you fast. It says when you fast, meaning that this was part of their culture. This is what they did. This wasn't up for debate. This wasn't a conversation about whether or not we should. This was a conversation about fasting. Okay, so the question isn't should we fast? The question that we're addressing here today is why we fast. Why do we fast? How do we fast? And we're not going to go into all the details because we'll be here for several hours if we were, but we're just going to gloss on some things. And listen, there's so many people who talk about fasting and go into details, and you can research. So we'll just talk about things here. And hopefully, if you've never fasted, this encourages you to do so. And if you do fast, hopefully this helps you deepen your relationship with God. Let's start off with what fasting is not, because there is a lot of misunderstanding, right? So let's make it very clear. Fasting is not just about not eating. Okay? That's not the point. The point is not to just not eat. The point is also not to twist God's arm. It's not about earning God's favor, nor about manipulating God into doing something that you want him to do. It's also not about getting the devil to do something you want him to do or not do. It's not punishment. And it's definitely not something for public display. It's not to be done in a pious way or with pomp and circumstance. Fasting is about surrender. It's about aligning our hearts with God. So it's about alignment, not attention. It's about alignment, not punishment. It's about alignment, not manipulation. It's about choosing to set something aside, so food, for a season so that we can fully focus on God. It creates space. It develops intentionality. It sharpens our focus because it weakens our flesh. And when I say flesh, I'm not talking about our body. Because I am someone who fully believes in God's divine design. Humanity is a creation of God, and it is the supreme creation God created to have relationship with him. Humans were not created for the earth. The earth and all within it was created for humans so that we could have relationship with God. So I value the human body. I do not see it as something that needs to be sacrificed or punished or is inherently sinful. I see it as a gift given to us, and we were created in his image and likeness so that we could have a relationship with him. When I use the word flesh on this podcast and all my resources, I'm referring to the desire of sin, the desire to do evil, to go against God. That's what I mean about flesh. So when we fast, we are tuning everything out except God. And that weakens the pressures of the world around us because it gets us to focus on God. So let me tell you my story about fasting. Because growing up, since I was 5 years old, I grew up in the Christian church and I went to church 6 days a week. I was very involved. I loved God, read the Bible, led worship, led prayer teams, went evangelizing, went to seminary, did all the things. But I was not a fan of fasting. I just love food too much. Can anyone else relate? Put in the comments below, I love food if you're like me, because fasting was always something I did not enjoy doing. I mean, I guess who enjoys fasting? Nobody does, but I really despise it. I did not like it. Not that I didn't know the value of it, I just was not interested until a time where I did. And let me tell you that story. So it was the Christmas season of 2014. So it was December 2014. I went on a vacation. We were going on a cruise. I was married to my ex-husband. For those of you who are new, I was in an abusive relationship that I was able to leave. And I've talked about that before. You can go back on my podcast to look at my story. But I was on a vacation with a family vacation on a cruise. And it was so bad that I was in some of the most beautiful places in the world. So much so that I did have incredible experiences because I went snorkeling in the most gorgeous place. And I have yet to go snorkeling anywhere that compares. I mean, every time I go in the water, that is the one thing that I compare it to. And everything falls short. So I was in some of the most beautiful places in the world, traveling on the water by boat. I am an ocean person, but all I wanted to do was go home to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Do you know where Fayetteville, North Carolina is? Have you been there? Well, I'll tell you one thing. The places where I was at were not worse than Fayetteville, North Carolina. Where I was in North Carolina, it's not like it was better. It wasn't like I was living on the ocean in some fabulous place or on a mountain. No, I was in a city. It was great. I loved living there, not to mock it or anything. I have very fond memories there. But I just wanted to go home. That's how bad it was. I'm looking out my balcony window at incredible islands in the Western Caribbean and these beautiful places, but I just wanted to go home. That's how bad it was. I'm not going to get into the details of what happened there. One day I'll tell my story. What I will say is that during that trip, I was feeling very compelled to participate in a fast that my church was doing, the church I was going at the time. And they were going to do a 21-day fast at the beginning of the year. It was going to be a Daniel fast, for those of you who are familiar with that. If not, I'll explain it later on. When I say compelled, I mean compelled. Okay, there was something in me that was telling me I had to do this fast, but not have as in a way of like resenting, like, oh, I have to do this fast. No, it was like, I have to do this. Like, this is necessary. I need this. I want this. It was just overwhelming sense and drive of doing this. So during the vacation, I had a notebook and I was writing down my plan, what my day was going to look like, when I was going to pray, what was I going to read. I'm a planner, guys. That's just the way I am. So you may think it's weird, but it's how I work. So I was making this plan and it was kind of driving me. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to start the new year. I needed God so bad. I needed direction. Life was in this miserable state. I didn't know what to do. I was so confused. I was so lost. I needed this. So we went home and I started the fast with the church, and I even created a prayer closet. So if you've ever seen the movie The War Room, or maybe this other movies I guess may have them, there's a literal prayer closet. You go in, it's a little room, and you have your prayers on the wall and all that. So I had a type of closet that I could do that, and I built like a little nook that was my prayer closet, and I had stuff on the wall, and it was where I was going to go each and every day to pray and meet with God. So I woke up every day. I would wake up early, before the sun came up, before anybody was up, and I would go in that closet and pray. And it was, and I had a journal. So I had a notebook that I have till today that I read, and it is one of my greatest treasures because there were things God spoke to me during that time that went right over my head. Okay, right over my head. I didn't understand it, but God was still speaking to me. He's just so awesome like that. But one of the first days, God said something to me that absolutely shook me and changed my life. And I think it's going to surprise you. And I've not talked about this publicly because it can be taken a little controversially, but I'm going to share it here because of how life-changing it was. And it was tied to fasting, and there's a lesson in it. So just bear with me while I tell you this story. I was praying one morning and I heard God so clearly. And he said, when it comes time to leave, I will be with you. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. There was no ands, if, or buts. There was no denying what I heard. It was clear as day, and I wrote it in my notebook. I didn't agree with it. I didn't understand it. But God spoke it to me. And I wrote it down, and I knew what he was saying. But I was so confused because there is no way that God just told me I can leave my husband. I didn't believe in divorce. It wasn't an option. I grew up in the type of church that even if someone cheated, you still forgave them and stayed. Divorce was like the ultimate sin. I literally have been told that I am going to hell because I am divorced. There's no forgiveness from divorce. I know. You're saying, but the Bible says trust me, I get that. But I grew up in a culture that was very misogynistic, and men will be men. So I'll just leave it at that. That's not what this podcast episode is about. Mike and I did talk about divorce in a previous episode. I'll link that below in case you're interested, because in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus does talk about divorce. So we talked about divorce, and it's very controversial. But we're not going to talk about the controversy here. I'm talking about what I heard God say, why I heard God say it, the intention behind it, and how it changed my life. So I heard God say that. And like I said, I didn't agree with it. That didn't make sense. I think you misspoke. Maybe I misunderstood you. Maybe, I don't know. But I wrote it down. Every lunchtime, I would go to church to pray because during those 21 days, they opened up the church. And I was very intentional. I was seeking God. I needed direction. And here God was giving me direction, and I was confused. So our church, so awesome. I miss this church so much. But they had clinical therapists who volunteered their time and worked at the church. So I was able to see a therapist. I was already seeing a psychiatrist, because I was mandated by the Army to see them. But I also went to church because now I needed spiritual guidance. I was lost. I didn't know what to do. What I was taught growing up didn't align with what I just heard God say. What is happening? Don't understand. So I went to this therapy. I went a few times actually, and I was telling her what I heard. And I had my notebook with me. So she saw me reading, and she said, what did you hear God say? And I read it to her. And she said, can you say that again? And I read it to her. And she said, the words God uses is very important when he speaks to you. God is very intentional. Did he say when, or did he say if? And I looked down and I said, when? And remember at the top of our conversation when I said, as I was going through planning this episode and meditating and thinking And I said the words Jesus uses here is very important because he didn't say if you fast, he said when you fast. And instantly I saw the connection. He didn't say if you leave, he said when you leave. And I thought, I have to record this. Someone who's listening to this podcast needs to hear this. God is calling you to fast. He's wanting you to align your heart with His. You're seeking direction and you need Him. And He's saying fasting is the answer. So when I saw that and it led me to explain to her, then I don't understand what God is saying because I was taught XYZ and she counseled me through it and there was a whole thing. So that's a story for a different day. But I tell you that because during that time, I felt compelled to fast. I knew I needed to fast. I wanted God so bad. I needed Him so bad. And my intention was just to hear from God. I needed to know what God had to say, what He was thinking. And this is where we've already talked about what fasting is not. And we've mentioned also what fasting is. And this is where my story reiterates what fasting is. Fasting is taking the time to align our hearts with God's, to get to know who God is and what His purposes are. Fasting is not about earning God's favor so that He answers your prayer and does what you want. Fasting is not about doing something to compel or manipulate God into doing what you want. Fasting is not about fighting the devil and getting him to back off. Fasting is about aligning our hearts with God's, understanding who He is better, creating more intimacy, developing our relationship with Him so that we come to know who He is and what His purposes are. That is the purpose of fasting. Now, there's something I want to address because this question came up. Should we fast for other people? Because I've seen individuals or known of individuals who fast for someone. And I think that's why I had an apprehension to fasting when I was younger, because this is primarily what I saw. People fasting for someone else, but to get that person to change. And I never liked it and I didn't have words for it. And I'm actually not going to use the word for it that I kind of want to because I feel like it's a little strong and possibly judgmental. What I will say is that you can fast for someone else. Okay, we see it in the Bible. Esther fasted for her people. Nehemiah fasted. Okay, there's different people in the Bible who fasted on behalf of other people. But ultimately, their fast was to align their hearts with God to get direction on what they needed to do. What I've seen people do with fasting is do it in a way where they're seeing it as I'm praying and fasting for that person, but the intention is to force change in that person's life. And I'm not saying that intention is always bad, but what I'm saying is fasting isn't going to force God to control another person. It's not going to manipulate that person into change. When we fast for someone, it is to align our heart with God so that we know how to pray on behalf of that person so that we can partner with God. When we learn God's heart and purposes, it allows us to partner with God to pray on behalf of. But at the core of that is the aligning of our heart with God's. And then our heart for that person will be aligned with God. And our prayers for that person will be aligned with God. Because we can think we know what that person needs. And there's some things that's common sense and we know that would be best for the person. But the approach that needs to be taken to change that person's life, we don't know. God knows. And through that, we can learn how to partner with God to help facilitate that process. But fasting isn't going to change another person's life. You can't control it. God doesn't control people. God can move on their behalf. God can pursue them and seek them out and create circumstances and situations that can align them and put them in a position to bless them, prosper them, and make them whole. But He's not going to control their behavior through your fasting. And your fasting is also not going to compel the devil or scare the devil to do what you want him to do. That's not what fasting is about. Fasting is about surrender. Fasting is about aligning. It's not about control. It's not about manipulation, because when we do those types of things, that is where it becomes Christian witchcraft. And I think that my adherence to is adherence even the right word? I think that my reluctance to fasting when I was younger was because that's what I was witnessing, and it didn't feel right. So when I fasted with the intention to desperately seek God, to get to know Him better, that was all the difference that I needed, because the circumstance around me didn't change. And this is why I encouraged you to go watch last week's episode, because the circumstance around me didn't change with that fast, nor with what God spoke to me during that time. The circumstance remained the same, and to be honest, to some degree got worse. But everything inside me changed. And what happened was I was able to see my circumstance in a different way. And I was able to rise above and overcome, because within me, it changed. My heart was aligned with God. I saw His purposes. I saw His heart. I knew what He wanted, and it was a no-brainer. What I needed to do was a no-brainer. It wasn't easy. It was extremely difficult. It wasn't, roses and sunshine. As a matter of fact, my entire world blew up. But there was a peace and a confidence within me because I was aligned with God's heart. And that's what fasting does. It may not change your circumstance. Eventually, your circumstance will change when you learn to walk through it, overcoming, right? Glory to glory, as we talked about last week. But while you're walking through that wilderness, while you're walking through the desert, while you're in that desperate, weak position, you know God's heart for you. And when you need to take that Psalm 91 approach where you're hidden in the wings of God, just hiding and being protected by Him, you know you're safe because He is your strong tower. He is your safe place. And when you need direction, you just ask God what His heart is and what His purposes are, and it becomes much easier. Fasting is not so that you can get a list of steps from God on what to do. You just need to know God's heart and purpose, and don't overthink it. This is not about a list of rules. This is not about commandments. This is about a relationship with God, knowing who God is, knowing His heart, knowing His purposes. And this is why one of the biggest things that I'm so passionate about is leading people to discovering who God is. Because when you know who God is, you're going to know who you are, and it's going to make life a lot easier. So in the show notes, just a shameless plug, I have my book In His Image, and you can check it out. And it's a book that talks about who God is and who we are, made in His image. So that's just an example of seeking God through fasting, and even if just prayer, maybe not fasting, but even in the simplicity of prayer, when you're seeking God and you're seeking direction, knowing his heart and his purpose is really the goal, because it's going to help you in everything that you do. Let's talk about, before we finish, some practical things, okay? If you've never fasted before, I wouldn't start with a 21-day Daniel fast unless you want to. Now, you may be asking, what the heck is a Daniel fast? So let me just say this first. Fasting, by definition, is where you abstain from food and sometimes water. But usually when people fast, they're fasting from food and they do drink water throughout. That is fasting. But you may have heard, or if you haven't, you can do research of the Daniel fast. And that's based on the story of Daniel in the Bible, in the book of Daniel, where he did a fast and basically he abstained from meat and sugars and things like that. And there's people who do that, and he did his for 21 days. So people who do it for 21 days. So that's an option too. The fast I did with my church, that's what kind of fast it was. It's not easy. It's difficult, but maybe that's too much for you to start. So to start, there's nothing wrong with simply starting by fasting one meal. God's not asking you to go crazy here. Okay, this is about building intimacy. That's the intention and that's the goal. It's not about trying to show that you're the most spiritual that you can. No, this is about intimacy. So start small. Maybe you start off with one meal. And instead of eating, take the time to pray, to seek God, to read the Bible, get to know him. Seek to align your heart with God. And I'm telling you that you may think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so hungry. I could never skip a meal, because that's how I was. But when you take the time instead and replace your physical food with him, it makes all the difference. Let me just share with you in Matthew 4. So just a few chapters before where we are right now, it talks about, as mentioned last week, when God led Jesus by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the tempter. Let me read that to you. It says, Matthew 4:1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was famished. So it's not like it was easy for Jesus. Jesus was human. He needed to eat, and he didn't, and he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. But Jesus answered, it is written, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And that is a quote from the Old Testament as well. So it's in a few places within Scripture. I share that with you because it's not saying that man doesn't live by bread. We were created as human beings and we require food. God knows that. He designed us that way. It says we don't live by bread alone, but we live by the words of God. God speaks today. He still speaks. He is alive. He lives in you. He lives in me, and we have relationship with him. He is a living being. He is our creator. He is our father. He longs for relationship and intimacy. He speaks. And our living requires that relationship. When you live with God and you have relationship with him, I'm telling you, it substantially increases your quality of life. You will have a much more satisfying and purpose-filled life when God is in it and you have a relationship with him. So when you replace that one meal, let's say that's all you're doing, okay? Doesn't require much. You replace that one meal that you think, oh, it's going to be so hard for me to skip breakfast. Oh, it's going to be so hard for me to skip dinner, whatever it is. And you use that time to have that moment with him, that little date with him. You're going to find that you're not that hungry. Like you're okay with it. That moment spent with God was totally worth the no food. Listen, I relate it to in the mornings. I go to my workouts very early, so sometimes I have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I have arguments in my head about whether or not I'm going to go, and I try to make excuses. But the one thing that drives me out of bed is knowing that I never go to a workout that I regret. After every single workout, no matter how tired I am, how exhausted I am, how much I don't want to go when I first leave, I always leave being grateful that I was there and that I did it and that I pushed through. I never regret it. Fasting is like that. Prayer is like that. Spending time with God is like, you will never regret the moment you took. It may be hard. It may not be easy. It may be difficult, but you will never regret it, and it will be life-changing. It will do something for you. It will add to your life. And lastly, I will say, this whole concept of fasting and aligning your heart with God, listen, our relationship with God should not ever be about what God can do for us or what we want Him to do. And this is where I saw fasting go wrong and why I had that reluctance with it. Because that's what I would see. People used fasting and intercession as a means to force to happen something they wanted to happen or what they thought should happen. And sometimes they may have been right. Listen, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying what changed my life was pursuing and seeking God for who He was, not what He could do for me. My life is not about what God can do for me. It's about who He is. What He does for me is just a reflection of who He is, which is why what I need to do, what my intention should be, is aligning my heart with His, because then what He does makes so much sense. Things make sense. Just like that word He gave me when I was fasting that I didn't understand, when I learned who He is, what His purposes are, and what His heart is, that word made so much sense. You shouldn't fast for God to do something, because what if that thing is not what is the best? We need to fast so that we can align our hearts with God and He can reveal to us what the best is, so that we can partner with Him and in prayer, through prayer, and then through our life, we reflect His heart. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that shifts something for you and helps you. So start small. Doesn't have to be a big production. You don't have to tell people. You don't have to die while you're doing it. Just go in with the intention of aligning your heart with God and strengthening that relationship. So I'm going to ask you for a favor, because over the last 6 months, we have grown this podcast organically. It's been amazing. And it's been thanks to all of you for your love and support and just being here. And if you're new here, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope that this blessed you. The best way that you can help us stay alive, keep growing, and keep reaching more people who need to hear this is by clicking that thumbs up. So whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this, give me a thumbs up, because it lets me know that you enjoyed the podcast. It also helps the algorithm, along with comments. So throughout our conversations, I don't want to be here at the table talking to myself. I'd love to hear what you have to say, hear your feedback, your comments. Maybe you didn't agree with me on something, or maybe you have something to add. Maybe you have a testimony of your own, or maybe you want to shout out something I said that resonated that you want other people to see, so they know, hey, this is worth listening to, and this changed my life. Trust me, that helps grow the podcast. If you're a longtime listener and you haven't yet, whatever platform you're listening on, make sure to review the podcast and let people know why you enjoy it and what to look forward to, so that they can join us for this conversation. And lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't know how often Mike's going to be able to join us over the next couple of months because Anna's going off to college. There's a lot going on. So I would love to have a person to talk to as we have these conversations about the Sermon on the Mount. You don't have to be local, so it can be virtual. I will set that up. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need a fancy microphone or a camera. You can literally just use your phone. Okay, we will figure it out. But if you are willing to come and join me because you love the Sermon on the Mount, you love studying the Bible, you love talking about Jesus, then reach out to me. Message me on any of the platforms, leave comments, or email me at hello@andreajohn.com and let me know that you'd love to be on. If I don't personally know you, that's okay. I'll set up some time for us to get to know each other, and I can get to know your heart and what you're interested in and kind of hear from you, and then we can plan to record an episode together. So feel free to invite yourself to this table because you're all welcome at my table. And that's it, guys. That's it for today. All about fasting. Well, I enjoyed that conversation, even though it was with myself. But I thank you so much for being here, for your support. I love you guys. Next week, we're going to talk about storing up treasures in heaven. What is that? What does it mean? What does it look like? How do we do it? We're going to talk about it. If you're someone and that's a topic you're interested in or you have experience in, you're passionate about it, reach out to me. Let's talk about it. Until next time, you keep uncovering your identity, discovering your purpose, and stepping into your destiny because your destiny awaits.